What up, Hyperchange? Welcome to another episode. Today we're doing a quick review of where fruit comes from, second quarter earnings, and conference call. As you guys know, this is one of my favorite micro caps. They specialize in doing certifications for organic, non-GMO, all that kind of stuff. I think they're in a sweet spot of the food industry in telling consumers where their food comes from, no pun intended. Anyway, so they reported second quarter results today, and the market cap's like 55, 60 million on this company, but they only did about 11 million in revenue last year. Earnings were a little less than $1 million. So this isn't a cheap company, but they have a great little business. They're profitable, great balance sheet, management owns a ton. One of my favorite micro caps, all in all, because of the industry they're in and what I just said. They reported results today, so I always follow their quarterly results, and my first thing that jumps out at me is I'm like, damn, this is a little bit of a disappointment because they acquired SureHarvest. So I thought there was going to be like accelerated revenue growth. China just opened up their market to US beef imports. This was supposed to be a huge tailwind for the business. Anyway, check this chart out. Revenue increased to 6.6 million, up about 25%. That was solid growth, but honestly, I would have expected a little bit faster. And given the company is trading for such a premium, like they need to grow. You know what I mean? Growth is priced in here. Gross profit was up 21%. Operating income goes negative. So this is a business that was almost always profitable, but the first half of this year has been tough. And so on the surface, I was a little bit bummed about these results, but the conference call made me feel a little bit better. Basically, what's going on here is they still had acquisition expenses from a mini acquisition they did, acquiring a Be Organic, made a video about that. That impacted the quarter, adding additional $50,000 of expenses. Also, there was about $140,000 of expenses related to amortizing assets from acquiring SureHarvest. So if you add up this about 200 grand of acquisition related expenses, that makes the results look a little bit better in the quarter, but still not really. I don't know. And I think the biggest driver of this is they've taken on all the costs of SureHarvest, but I'm not sure that they're getting all the revenue. When they acquired the company, they said it was doing about 1.7 million in annualized recurring revenue, but through the first half of this year, they've only had about 600,000 in revenue, actually a little bit less. So now I'm like, what's going on? And on the conference call, I asked my first ever question on a conference call. It was pretty epic. I basically asked, so you guys said there was 1.7 million in recurring revenue. Looks like we're trending a little bit below that. What's going on here? It sounds like SureHarvest is a super seasonal business and they're going to get a bunch of sales in Q3 and Q4. That's going to ramp up. They're still on track to hit that 1.7 million in revenue. There was a couple 100,000 in revenue that I guess SureHarvest was like counting as revenue, but that where fruit comes from had to report as unearned revenue. So that was a minor hit as well. But they expect a very strong back half of the year from SureHarvest. Basically what looks like happening is they're taking on the bulk of the expenses, pretty much, or all the expenses for SureHarvest, but a lot of the revenue is weighted for the second half of the year. So hopefully where fruit comes from will get more profitable in the second half of the year as SureHarvest really produces incremental revenue. But that's yet to be seen, but I think it was promising to get a little more clarity on that seasonality. Going through my notes, a couple other things from the conference call. They're hiring a bunch of new people up front to get ready for a huge boom in demand for source and age verification to import to China. So there's a little bit of ramp costs that they're paying ahead of time to get that done. A couple more notes on China. It sounds like this is going to be huge for the company. It's the second largest and fastest growing consumer of beef in the world. China's middle class is the size of the entire US and they love beef. And this is exactly the target market that Where Food Comes From wants to tackle. I was just in China a month ago. They love Australian beef. It's regarded as super premium, and it didn't look as good as any steaks that you can buy here. So I think when American beef hits the market, China's going to go crazy for that. And Where Food Comes From is already guided that could add 4 million to their auditing revenue alone. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but given how small this company is, that could really move the needle. Also, not just source and age verification requirements for China, potentially they're going to want to see that these cows haven't been treated with hormones as well. So if they get the verification, Where Food Comes From in their press release says that non-hormone treated cattle programs are also getting coupled with source and age verification to allow entry for these imports into China. So not only getting source and age verification, but they're also getting non-hormone treated cattle. So a bunch of new audits are going to come online as these producers try and access the Chinese market. This is awesome. And it also kind of goes to show the advantage of Where Food Comes From having all these different standards they can audit against. China wanted to get a little bit stricter on their requirements. Where Food Comes From already has a second auditing program that can fit those even stricter requirements, and this allows them to collect even more revenue per producer. A Be Organic, that new acquisition is going to give them 125 new customers all around the world, and most importantly, expertise in aquaponic and hydroponic growers. I think this is exposure to the indoor farming trend, which is going to be massive. I couldn't be more bullish on almost any sector in the economy than indoor farming. I think this is what the world needs. It's just way more sustainable. So I love to see Where Food Comes From get a toehold into that industry, which I think over the next 5 to 10 years is going to be really exciting. And I'd love to see them be a leader there through this acquisition. Q&A part of the conference call asked about SureHarvest. Basically, like I said, super seasonal. Ian Castle, head of the Microcap Club, gets on the call. He said that, I follow him on Twitter, he's pretty cool. He was asking about what's the vision here for Where Food Comes From to get all this data they have in front of the end consumer, and like how do they reach consumers essentially as this front end platform instead of just doing the back end audits. John goes on to say that Where Food Comes From magazine that they just launched, which is a paper magazine, I guess, and an e-magazine, which is where they highlight all these different producers that are all using Where Food Comes From services. It sounds like that's a new strategy for the company to push into getting to being a consumer-facing brand. So really interesting to see what will happen with the magazine. I'll try and put a link, if I can find it, to the PDF version, but that was the first thing they put out. I don't really know how this is going to evolve, how they're going to make money, or really what the plan is behind that, but interesting to note that there's kind of a new strategy for Where Food Comes From, and they're betting on this magazine to be able to reach consumers. They have about 80 people now. Big hires are coming in. This is bigger than the company's ever been. It sounds like the culture is doing really well. John sounded really positive about what was going on at the company. Last question about Amazon and Whole Foods. Have they been contacted by anyone at Amazon since the acquisition? Also, someone asked if they were expecting any impact in their relationship with Whole Foods because of this acquisition. And for those who don't know, Where Food Comes From has been partnered with Whole Foods for a long time now, and they're actually one of like the premium partners. So when you try to sell your thing in Whole Foods, they're like, oh, get it non-GMO. And they're like, oh, how do I do that? And then they're like, oh, call Where Food Comes From. So hopefully that stays when Amazon acquires the company. And according to Leanne on the call, she said that they're meeting at a customer location with someone from the Amazon team. They can't really release any info about that, but that's happening. That kind of wraps it up. At first, I thought the quarter was a little bit weak in terms of financials. I still think the long-term vision and thesis here is totally intact, and it made me feel a lot better when I realized that the SureHarvest revenue was very seasonal, so we should see that pick up in the back half of the year. I still think we're poised for a really exciting next year or two for this company as China opens up its beef import market. SureHarvest really gets rolling. Like, there's a ton to be excited about. I don't own any stock. I'm still watching it closely. One of my favorite microcaps out there just because I think management's awesome and they're in a great little niche that I think is only going to grow. So that's Hyperchange. Let me know if you guys have any more comments on Where Food Comes From quarter. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.